Hi, if you join me for the first time, my name is Laurent. I'm an entrepreneur coach and podcast host. It's pretty easy for entrepreneurs to become the bottleneck in their businesses. When it happens, they are stuck. And as a result, their business is stuck. That's when I come in. I get entrepreneurs unstuck through coaching and training. In this video, Paul Baker is joining me. Paul has been a client since January 2021. We first met when he was a guest on my podcast, Interviews Cracking the Entrepreneurship Code, episode 46. I have to say it's one of my favorite episodes. He came back a second time on the podcast for a special episode titled, How Can Entrepreneurs Stay Motivated? With a panel of entrepreneur guests. You will find the links to both episodes in the video description below. Quite a lot has happened in Paul's life in the past 2 years since he exited his business. I will let him tell us more about it. As I mentioned, Paul is a client and he has agreed to talk about coaching in general and the benefits of coaching for him in particular. Hey, Paul, thank you for your time today.
Good morning, Laurent. Thanks for inviting me to this podcast.
All right. So, like I said, a lot of things has happened since we first met back in January 2021. So can you give us a little bit of context? What were you doing then, and what are you doing today?
Well, obviously, when we first met, you invited me to a podcast, and I do recall the after the podcast was recorded, which was very interesting actually, and of course it was during the pandemic period. So life was quite different for everyone right around the world at that point in time. I do recall you saying to me, well, as a thank you for doing the podcast, you get an hour's free coaching. And me being me said, oh, I don't need that. Thanks very much, Laurent. That's very kind of you, but you know, I'm okay, really, you know. And you said to me, well, what have you got to lose? It's free. It's 1 hour of your time. And I thought, actually, you're right. I'm going to do the hour. And you said to me, if you know you don't like it, fine, nothing lost. But if you like it, well, it could be of some use to you. And in fact, I found it very useful. I was very surprised, I'll be honest, at how eloquent and effective you were at really managing that 1 hour, which, let's face it, is not a lot of time, to really sort of ask me questions that really made me stop and think. And in some ways actually vexed me a little bit, because I thought, I haven't really thought about that, and maybe I should. So I think it was a very objective, outside questioning and probing, perhaps, which really made me, as a business leader, stop and think a bit differently, which is always good. So that led to us having, me saying, okay, let's carry this on, and we started off, and it's been incredibly useful. And obviously, I'm still a client of yours, as you know. People may not know that, even though I've exited St Pierre now. So you were with me right through that journey, and I found it incredibly useful. I've got to be honest, and that's coming from somebody who was probably quite doubtful at the beginning. So that's a bit of a turnaround.
Well, thank you for saying that. Well, especially since when I remember when we started, when we talked on the podcast, I think you said you had just like hired like 70 people, or you went from 30 to 70 people just like that.
That's correct.
And 2 years after you exit the business.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're a successful entrepreneur, right? So why did you decide to get coaching with me? What was your bottleneck?
That's a good question. You always ask very good questions, Laura, which always makes you think. I think it's difficult sometimes when you're leading a business, because you have to make all the decisions not all of them, but as a team, you make some decisions as a team, obviously, but some key decisions, sometimes it can be quite lonely at the top. And my business partner, Jeremy, had retired the year before. And we very much run the business as a partnership, really. Me championing America, and Jeremy really being back at base. So I think I didn't really have the sounding board that I used to have. So for me, it was incredibly useful to have you putting questions to me, making me think differently. And of course, you were very objective because you're outside of the business, so you would come from a completely different angle. I think sometimes I think any person who's leading a business knows what their strengths and weaknesses are. And you mentioned about recruiting, 70 odd people, which we did online, which was a real challenge because we didn't actually get to meet people. I think perhaps you helped me to realize where my gaps were, which weren't perhaps obvious. I'm sure my team would say different. They'd say, well, we knew where your gaps were.
That's your wife, she would say also. She knew.
Yeah. But yeah, it was incredibly useful to me. And I think as we went through that exit process, as you know, when there were moments where perhaps I didn't have the time to spend with you, I extended it out to the team. And that also became incredibly useful to those team members. And we extended that across, I think, about 10 team members. And we had a bit of an agenda there. And that worked incredibly well as well. And I think in the business, there was a feeling that training was the way. I wasn't always convinced about training, I'll be quite honest with you. I think it can be very positive. I think it can also be very divisive because you get pigeonholed as a person. There's all these exercises. Whereas I think with a coach like yourself, it's far more personal, and it really gets into how you think, how others see you, and perhaps the things that you really need to address and the questions you really need to answer. It's more of a personal conversation, which gets into the nitty gritty of how you operate, what you need to do, which will empower you, and also be useful for the people around you as well, which is critical in a business. So I was really interested to see how our relationship evolved, and of course, obviously, I then extended that to the team. So yeah, it was a light bulb moment, really, coaching for me. I wish I'd done it earlier in my career. Sometimes you have regrets in business. Sometimes you have a lot of regrets in business.
So why didn't you? Because that was my next question.
I think you just get busy doing what you're doing. And, I think the very fact that, you mentioned that figure, 70 odd people, it really was 70 people. So I was so busy building the American side of the business. I think when we went into the pandemic, there were about 4 or 5 of us working on what at that point was a £50 million revenue business, profitable as well. So keeping the wheels on that took me all of my time and energy. And in fact, the 4 people working with me on America, and some of the broader team as well, but they were split between the UK and the US. There was only really 5 dedicated to the US. That's why I didn't, because I just didn't have time. Now, I know people can say, well, you've got to make time for stuff like this. It's very easy to say that, but when you've got a very high growth business and it's going gangbusters, it took a lot out. And of course, we had a pandemic to manage, and that put a huge additional pressure on the pressure that we were already feeling. Scaling a business in the way that we scaled it is all encompassing. And then when you have to go out and recruit 70 people to keep the scale going and to keep the momentum, doing something like coaching seems a very self-indulgent, or that's how it appeared to me. It had sort of occurred to me. I thought about getting a mentor, And I just thought, I don't know when I'm going to find any time to give time to this person. But I think you came in at the point where, because of the pandemic, I was grounded and I couldn't fly to the US. That did give me more time. Um, and I was in the office, nobody else was.
Mhm.
So I think there was only four or five of us in the office because we're a food business and we were allowed to, and that was allowed. We were allowed to operate like that. I did find myself with the time, so I think it was one of those things where the timing was right for me. You were in the right place at the right time, and I had the space and energy to say, actually, this might be useful. I knew an exit was on the table,
Mhm.
hence why we were recruiting to ensure that we recruited to follow the growth, not to exit. But of course, we wanted to make sure that if we were going to exit, the business was in very, very good shape, and everything was pinned down. So it's a bit of a dual strategy, that one. But I knew that was coming, and I thought it might be useful, not having been through an exit like this, like we did. And I think anybody in business aspires to a successful exit, and indeed we got that. But it's we can talk about that, but it's quite an intense process. So having you as a wingman was actually very, very useful at some particularly challenging points in the process, because it is a very it's not just, people see the money with an exit, but it's actually, if you founded a business, it can be quite emotional, because it's something you've built. It's your baby, and you're going to hand it over to somebody else.
I remember
Which,
the discussions we had about what are you going to do next?
yeah, I flicked back through my notes last night that I'd made with you over that period, just to see if there's any nuggets in there, and there are. And one of them was like, make a list of your plan, a step-by-step plan of what you're going to do when you exit. And of course, it's that classic thing, no plan survives contact with the enemy. So we did have a plan.
Mhm.
I think we executed some of it, or I executed some of it, but not all of it. So, but helpful. It was helpful to go through that process. I think very helpful.
I remember when we first started talking, and we got our first coaching sessions together. You were talking a lot about purpose. You were
Yeah.
asking yourself, why am I here? What is it that and I didn't know about the exit at that time. What is it that I'm doing? Do you recall that?
I recall it very clearly,
Yeah,
actually. I think you'd mentioned that sort of Simon Sinek why,
yeah.
which I'm sure a lot of business people know, and if they don't know, it's definitely worth a read. Um, it's very it we I think we did get to the bottom of it, but it's one of those tricky questions. Why do you do what you do? And it really makes you think hard. For
Mm.
some people, it's very clear at the outset. I wasn't one of those people. I sort of weaved my way through my career. I'd love to say I had a very clear vision. I think my vision came later. There was a vision, for sure, at a certain point, but I think it had to slowly develop. Maybe I'm just a slow learner.
No, I don't think so. So can you tell us a little bit about the practical benefits of coaching for you? And also, I'm very interested in this new adventure of yours. You recently exited your business. So now, how is coaching? What are your expectations from coaching from now on?
Okay, so the first part of the question there
Mm.
is what was my experience of coaching? Was that right?
Well, the practical benefits of coaching.
Practical benefits. Sorry, yeah. Um, the practical benefits are active listening, which clearly I'm still practicing. The practical benefits. Well, I think sometimes if I keep it to the exit process, going through that process, it it's almost like an out of body experience as a founder, because you're having to talk about your business, something that you've nurtured and cared for and grown and built a culture and people's lives and people's careers, and you're into every part of it, and then suddenly you have to almost disengage yourself in the process, because it does become about the finances, the profitability, the sustainability of the business, everything, the brand. You go into so much detail in due diligence. You actually learn a lot about your business in due diligence, whether it's financial due diligence or commercial due diligence. You get these massive reports and they're really insightful. So just at the point, you're on a trajectory where you're going to exit and leave, you start to find out all this fascinating information about business. So you almost start sparking again, but you're going to sort of jump off the cliff, sort of thing. So it's kind of a weird scenario. I think practically you helped me to navigate some of those challenges and perhaps straighten my head out, if that makes sense. Because as I said at the beginning of this, it's emotional, and it's financial, and it's other people. It affects a lot of people's lives. I mean, we had 100 odd people working for us, which is not massive in terms of some businesses, but it's still 100 lives. It's 100 families, and and we had a great culture. So and of course there's a certain degree of confidentiality with an exit like that, so you have to retain that confidentiality. And your natural way of being a practical outcome perhaps is you have to change your demeanor a little bit. You have to you can't share everything with everybody, which we were used to doing. We were used to being very open, and suddenly you kind of have to close down a bit because of the nature of the process, because of confidentiality. So there's lots and lots of practical reasons why coaching I think can really help in an exit process, particularly if you've never been through one, because it's a bit of a roller coaster, and it can go on as well. I mean, you could be looking at anything between 12 months and 2 years. It's a long time. It's a long time for that sustained different approach to the way you perhaps normally operate. So I think having a coach by you, next to you, sometimes, I'm sure sometimes, Lauren, when we spoke, you could probably sense the frustration with certain elements, which I don't need to go into here, but and you were able to give me, I remember one thing you said to me. I think I was particularly stressed one time. You said, well, what can you control and what's out of your control? And so I talked about that. And he said, well, really, the only thing you need to focus on is what's in your control, because what's out of your control, what's the point of focusing on it? And that was actually very helpful. I don't know if I've ever said that to you, but that was very helpful at that point, because it's that realization that, well, I can't do anything about that. It's out of my control. And then you let it go into the ether. And that's like somebody lifting a weight off your back, because it's something that you've probably been right in the apex of that situation, trying to work it out and grinding away at it.
You were listening.
I'm getting better. And the second part of your question was sort of more now. Is that right?
Yes.
Well, I always had lots of things going on. I think once we always knew there was going to be an exit. There was 3 investors in our business, myself, Jeremy, my co-founder. We had some private equity, BGF, who were very good. Jeremy wanted to retire. BGF wanted to exit. That left me. I had to make a decision. The management had some equity as well. So I had to make a decision. Do I stay in this business potentially as a minority shareholder, having led it with Jeremy for 20 odd years? Is that going to work for me? The simple answer was no. So really, it kind of forced my hand, which again was something I had to get. Probably took me a year to get my head around that, because America was on fire. The brand was doing all the things that I'd envisioned, and that's perhaps the vision. It was doing all of that and still is. And I've sort of got to decide to jump off, sort of, just as it's going like that. So that was quite difficult for me to get my head around, but I think you helped me with that. I'd always had side gigs. I've also got a charity called RAPAID, which I set up in 2016 with a school friend of mine who was in the military for many years, and he brought me this idea with an emergency bandage that can save lives. And there's all sorts of accident, bad stuff happens every day, everywhere. Let's be honest, whether it's a road traffic accident or some crime, knife crime, or worse, indeed, as we all know, without going into that. Bad stuff goes down. So he brought me this idea with this bandage that they use on the battlefield, and said these should be everywhere. They should be publicly available. And I said, yeah, that's a really simple idea, but a really good idea. And I could see it was scalable. It didn't take much explaining internationally. This could work in any country in the world. So I like that aspect of it, that we could scale it. Yeah, and a very simple life-saving idea. So we set about that in 2016, and now I'm putting time to that. Yesterday, we deployed 60 bags into taxis in southwest of the UK, a town called Exeter, my hometown, actually. We put 60 bags of 4 bandages in taxis. So, if something bad happens, there's usually a taxi nearby. That's our first campaign. So between charity, probably film, family as well. I need to be around a bit more. I've put 20 years into being this perhaps successful, I suppose. So yeah, I'm going to be spending a bit more time with my family, which is great, I got to say. And there's a lot of other charity work that I'm doing as well. There's actually a huge amount. I think when we were very fortunate, we sold the business for just shy of 300 million sterling. It's a huge amount of money. So yeah, I think if you can, you should. I think Lisa and our family, we're in a position to help lots and lots of people now, which is what we're setting about doing. Yeah, having a good time ourselves, looking after our, having some nice holidays and what have you. But doing some good stuff in the world as well, because you can change a lot of lives with that sort of money. So we're setting things up to do that. It's good, actually. I think that's where a lot of business gets a bad rap, I think. Because when you look at a lot of people who exit businesses, typically a high percentage of them go on to do philanthropic activity. And, that's a force for good, which, quite often there always will be bad press about business. And where there's bad businesses, they should get bad press. But I think business is a power for good. And certainly that's how I see it. That's what I'm going to be doing. I'm probably not going to do much in the bakery sector. I'll be honest, I've given a lot of my life to the bakery sector. It is my heritage, and it's been very, very kind to me. Where I do give to the bakery sector will be to students and the next generation, and perhaps doing what I'm doing here, talking about the journey. And I am in fact speaking at my old university in Cardiff to food technology students. And I'll probably do a bit of that. That's another way of giving back. Obviously, you can give back in terms of financially, but I do want to give some of my time and experience, however useful that might be to somebody. So that's a different way of giving back. So I will be committing to that as well. So yeah, I've got plenty going on, Laurel. I'm pretty busy. People think I'm retired, and it's like I'm actually pretty busy.
How about coaching in that, busy schedule? Why do you keep?
Sorry. Well, my coach said to me recently, you've got to learn to say no a bit more, Paul. So it's probably a no to coaching, actually, Laura. Maybe. I mean, I suppose I was coaching people probably for the past 30 years, actually. Um, but I never coached myself. I never had a coach myself. So I think that's the thing. Um, yeah, possibly. I mean, I think there's probably going to be a bit of that with RAPAID, the
Mm.
charity, and indeed with Mad as Birds. I think there will be a bit of coaching there. Um, Possibly. If it's pertinent and required, then I'd probably do it. I'm probably not going to go seeking it. But if somebody approached me, I'd probably say, yeah, okay. So
Remember over the past 2 years, one particular haha moment.
yeah, I think well, I think I mentioned it earlier, and this was one that I should probably give you another one, really. Um, well, yeah, there's probably two. It was what can you control, what can't you control. I thought that was very powerful, actually, for a business leader, because you naturally think you have to control everything. And I think for me, it was a realization that actually I can let go of the reins on this one because it's out of my control. I can't do anything about it. So that was definitely an aha moment. I think the other aha moment was me realizing that in the exit process, I'm really busy. Having to do all these meetings and due diligence, and there's so much to do. It's a very intense period. And I realized that I couldn't get to my coaching time with you. And I think you said to me, well, what about if I coach one of your team? And that was now, I was like, actually, that's a great idea. Now, it's probably a bit of a sales pitch from you as well. I was aware of that, but that's fine. We're all selling. But I thought, actually, this is a very good solution. And we did it. And it worked really, really well. And then we expanded it. And then we brought all those people together for like a peer group session. That was incredibly powerful. And in fact, we had a party at the weekend, which was me and Jeremy's leaving party. And several of those people who had coaching with you mentioned it to me and said, that was so good. And I think in the business prior to that, there'd been this sort of idea that training was the way. And I was always a bit, I don't really know. I'm not really convinced about training. I mentioned that earlier. Don't get me wrong, it can be very good. I haven't got a downer on everybody's doing training. It's got a lot of positives. But I think it depends on your business and your culture and your people as to whether training will work and what type of training it is. I don't like the training kind of paints you out to be, a plant or a monkey or something. I don't know how useful that is really. Whereas when we expanded coaching out to the team, that was really powerful. And again, I wish I'd done it earlier because our plan was, well, we had a plan which was to, put a group of ladies through the coaching and then put a group of men through the coaching and then put them together and really build a supportive peer group. And I could see that evolving, but I wasn't able to complete it. I hope that the HR manager at St Pierre is continuing with that, but that's not my decision now. So that'll be somebody else's decision. But that was an aha moment. It was like, wow, we can really sort of do so. And I did think to myself, actually, this is a great thing to do before I go, because really, making sure that culture and the individual as well. It's about empowering the individual, I think. And I think what you manage to do with those people is empower them, which is incredibly important in a business. It's very difficult to achieve empowerment, but it's incredibly important and it is very personal. It is very personal. So yeah, there was, and of course there were 2 or 3 things you asked me to do, Laura, that I never did.
Wait,
Got to
wait,
write
wait.
a book, got to do a
Not
podcast and do a TED talk. I didn't do any of them.
yet, not yet.
Not yet. I'm not ready for any of them yet. I
But
don't know if I ever will be.
I do remember one time, it was during COVID still, and it was a sad moment for you. I don't know if we can talk about
Yeah,
it.
I remember. Yeah, I remember that very well. Yeah.
And then you were upset,
Yeah.
uh, and I had you write about your feelings.
Yes. Yes.
Do you want to talk about that?
I can do. Yeah, probably enough. Yeah, it's well, let's get to it. Colin Bell, who had worked in our business for 30 years, he embodied our culture. He's a wonderful guy. And he was one of those people in your business that will turn their hand to anything and always be very welcoming to people. He would be the first person you'd come into contact with in our business, and he'd sort your phone out. He would sort your laptop out. He would just fix stuff. Now, he had a job as a customer liaison manager with our warehouses, and he had a really important job. But he would do all of this out of the goodness of his heart. He was just one of life's wonderful people. And when everybody went back home during the pandemic and there was lockdowns, Colin stayed in the office because he didn't have a home office. There was 5 of us who stayed in the office, and unfortunately, he did contract COVID. His partner was a nurse, and we did everything to segregate in the office because he was Jamaican descendancy, and we knew that he was particularly vulnerable to COVID. So yeah, unfortunately his partner, he contracted COVID from his partner, and within a 2-week period, he died. Which, yeah, that was like a bombshell going off in the business. It was, yeah, it was. I don't really want to say a low point in my career because that demeans it. It was a low point in my life because we didn't just work together. When you work with somebody for 30 years, it's a bit more than working together, really. And he was, yeah, he was such a key person in our culture. It was like somebody had ripped the heart out of our culture. That's how it felt. It was awful, awful. And managing that was tough because nobody could get together. We had to hold a memorial online, which was incredibly impersonal and difficult. And we couldn't go to the funeral. We did go and line the street, spaced out at the funeral. Yeah, very, very difficult. I wouldn't wish that on anybody. And of course, lots of people lost people during the pandemic. It was a terrible period of time. And yeah, you did say to me to write down what I thought at that point, and I did. I haven't gone back to it actually, though. Although it's bizarre because somebody sent me a funny little video last night, which was me, Colin, and Janet recorded in the office during the pandemic a little birthday message for somebody, and we all had to stay 20 feet apart, but we were all sort of doing this little dance around the office because we were all having to stay far apart from each other. And I'm saying to Janet, stay away from Colin, don't get close to Colin, put that down, wipe that. And she's saying the same to me. And it's a funny little video, really. And one of my team sent me that last night after, we had a big party on Saturday, which we had a little mention for him at as well. So yeah, tough. When things like that happen in the business, I suppose you expect it in your life, but when it happens within a business and your culture, it kind of wrong foots you a bit. You almost don't expect it to happen. It's even more of a surprise. So yeah, there was a lot of people had that experience during the pandemic. It's awful, truly awful.
All right, so let's move forward. It's time for you pitch about coaching. What would you say to anyone who would like to know more about coaching?
here we are. We're talking. I'm still a client. Laura, people might think, I've exited the business. I don't need coaching anymore. Actually, quite the reverse. Actually, I'm embarking on a new chapter in my life, into a charity, into a different business, in a different sector. That's exactly the time you need coaching. So I don't, for me, this is a continuum. Now it's something that I've found incredibly powerful, incredibly useful. It's helped me to navigate lots of tricky situations in a practical way, I might say, not a sort of theoretical management speak way, but in a very personal. Well, Paul, this is what you're like. Why don't you try this? Because this has probably worked for you. And I think that aspect of coaching, I think for me, it's got far more power than training. It gave me a deeper understanding of me, how I interact with the team, the culture, the purpose, all of those things. And I think we worked at different things at different points, Laura, depending on where I was in my journey. And of course, that evolves. Whereas I think training, it's like being hit with a blunt object repeatedly. Whereas I think coaching evolves with you and it changes with you. And I think that's very important, actually, because my problem with, oh God, I'm going to get loads of trainers coming on to me saying, you got a real downer on us. I think the problem with training is it pigeonholes you, and I don't like pigeonholing people. I started off my career as a baker in a craft bakery in Devon. I ended up selling, an international branded business. Am I a baker? I've evolved away from that, probably. That's the truth. So I think people do evolve, people do change. And I think coaching recognizes that and is built to deal with that. So that's where I think coaching is really powerful.
Thank you very much, Paul, for sharing your experience with coaching.